I stood in the cold, unfinished basement of the house I'd helped design, listening to my stepdaughter's party happening 3 floors above me. The bass from her music shook the exposed ceiling beams. Nadine, my late husband's second wife, had told me this morning that I'd be more comfortable downstairs anyway, while Brielle needed the penthouse suite for her lifestyle. They thought moving me to the basement meant I was beneath them now. What they didn't know was that my husband Walter had left something behind, a hidden clause that would destroy them the moment they tried to erase me. Before I tell you how a basement became the foundation that brought down a house of lies, hit that like button and subscribe. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the day my whole world changed. My name is Evelyn Wakefield. I'm 62 years old, and 3 months ago I buried my husband Walter after 40 years together. We'd built his real estate company from nothing, working side by side in a tiny office above a grocery store. I handled the finances, the legal paperwork, the difficult negotiations Walter didn't have patience for. He was the vision. I was the execution. Together, we'd created something worth millions. But I was Walter's first wife, and in the last 5 years of his life, he'd married Nadine, a woman 20 years younger who'd been his secretary. She came with Brielle, her daughter from a previous marriage, a woman in her late 20s who'd never worked a day in her life. When Walter died, I expected grief. What I got was erasure. The day after the funeral, Nadine sat me down in what used to be my living room and explained how things would change. Walter left very clear instructions, she said with false sympathy. The house goes to family. You were his first wife, but I'm his widow. Brielle is my daughter, which makes her family too. I'd walked through the house that afternoon in a daze. Every room held memories I'd carefully crafted. The kitchen with custom cabinets I'd designed. The library where Walter and I used to read together on Sunday mornings. The master bedroom with the bay window overlooking the garden I'd planted myself, rows by rows. Now everything was changing. Nadine had already redecorated, replacing my understated elegance with gaudy gold fixtures and enormous crystal chandeliers. Walter's study, the quiet sanctuary where he'd made his most important business decisions, had been converted into a bar with neon signs and a pool table. My old bedroom, the master suite I'd slept in for decades, was now Brielle's walk-in closet. Racks of designer clothes filled the space where my bed used to be. It's just more practical this way, Nadine had explained when she saw my face. Brielle needs the space for her influencer career. She has a lot of outfit changes. I'd said nothing. I'd learned years ago that silence was often more powerful than argument. But as I descended to the basement that first night, carrying my single suitcase, I noticed something. The safe. Walter's hidden safe, built into the foundation wall behind a false panel. He'd shown it to me 20 years ago, made me memorize the combination. Just in case, he'd said. Living in the basement was worse than I'd imagined. The concrete floor was cold even through the thin rug I'd brought down. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows. There was a small bathroom with a cracked mirror and a shower that never got quite warm enough. At night, I could hear Brielle's parties upstairs, the laughter and music and the sound of expensive heels on hardwood floors. One morning, Nadine came downstairs to deliver what she clearly thought was a final blow. She stood at the bottom of the steps, not quite entering my space, and smiled. "You know, Evelyn, Walter moved on. He built a new life with me. You were just his first, like a practice run. Nobody invited you to stay after he died. You're here out of charity." Brielle appeared behind her, holding a mimosa. "Exactly. The ex nobody invited. Honestly, it's kind of pathetic." They left laughing. I sat on my cot and stared at the ceiling. But I wasn't crying. I was planning. That afternoon, a courier arrived with legal papers. Nadine had them delivered to the basement entrance, not even bothering to hand them to me personally. I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The document stated that I was not mentioned in Walter's primary will. Everything, the house, the business, the assets, went to Nadine with provisions for Brielle. I sat on that cot holding those papers for an hour, feeling the weight of 40 years being erased with legal language. Then I remembered something. I walked to the safe hidden behind the false panel. My fingers remembered the combination even though I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were documents, deeds, stock certificates, and on top a sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's distinctive handwriting. The envelope was marked, "For Evelyn. For when they forget what you built." My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before Walter died. "My dearest Evelyn," it read. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Nadine has shown her true colors. I knew this would happen. I knew she would try to erase you, to take credit for everything we built together. I was a fool to marry her, but I was sick and lonely, and she was there. That doesn't excuse it. I've left provisions. There's a clause, an irrevocable addendum to my will that only my personal lawyer, Mr. Ellison, knows about. It's triggered by specific conditions. If they mistreat you, if they try to push you out, everything changes. Trust Ellison. Trust yourself. You were always the real architect of everything we built. I'm sorry I didn't protect you better while I was alive. I'm protecting you now. All my love, Walter." The next morning, I called the number Walter had written at the bottom of the letter. Mr. Ellison answered on the second ring. He was Walter's personal lawyer, someone I'd met a handful of times over the years at company events. "Mrs. Wakefield," he said warmly. "I was wondering when you'd call. I assume you found Walter's letter?" I did. He mentioned a clause, an addendum. Ellison was quiet for a moment. "Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? This isn't a conversation for the phone." I took a taxi to his office downtown, not wanting to ask Nadine for access to one of the cars that used to be mine. Ellison's office was exactly as I remembered, wood-paneled, lined with law books, smelling of old paper and leather. He gestured for me to sit and pulled out a thick file. "Walter came to me 6 months before he died," Ellison began. "He was worried. He'd seen changes in Nadine's behavior, noticed her interest in his assets more than his health. He wanted to protect you, but he also wanted to test her, see if she'd prove him wrong." "And the clause?" I asked. Ellison smiled slightly. "The clause states that if you are ever removed from the main residence or excluded from company affairs, the entire estate reverts to you. Everything." I stared at him. "Everything? House, business, assets, all of it." Walter was very specific. He believed that if Nadine truly cared about you as family, she'd treat you with respect. If she didn't, well, then she'd prove she was only after the money. Ellison leaned forward. "The basement. Move?" That triggered the clause. "By demoting you to the basement while giving Brielle the penthouse, Nadine violated the conditions. You're now the legal owner of everything." I couldn't speak. 40 years of being the quiet one, the one who worked behind the scenes, and now this. "There's going to be a formal will reading next week," Ellison continued. "The standard will is read first, the one that gives everything to Nadine. Then I read the handwritten addendum. I'd like you to be there." "I'll be there," I said quietly. The will reading was held in Ellison's conference room. Nadine arrived, wearing head-to-toe designer black, Brielle beside her in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They looked like they were attending a premiere, not a legal proceeding. I sat in the corner, wearing a simple navy dress. Nadine barely glanced at me. Ellison began reading the standard will. As expected, it left everything to Nadine, with generous provisions for Brielle. I watched Nadine smile, watched Brielle squeeze her mother's hand in victory. Then Ellison set down the first document and picked up a second, smaller one. "And now," he said, his voice changing slightly, "I need to read a handwritten clause that Walter left with me personally, dated 2 weeks before his death." Nadine's smile faltered. "Handwritten? That's irregular." "It's perfectly legal when properly witnessed and notarized, which this was," Ellison said calmly. "The clause reads as follows. If at any time after my death my first wife, Evelyn Wakefield, is removed from the main residence, excluded from company decisions, or treated as anything less than an equal member of this family, all assets, properties, and holdings revert to her immediately and in their entirety." The room went silent. Nadine's face drained of color. Brielle's mouth fell open. "This is a joke," Nadine whispered. "This can't be legal." Ellison looked at her over his glasses. "It's completely legal. And by moving Mrs. Wakefield to the basement while your daughter occupies the penthouse suite, you've violated the clause. As of this moment, Evelyn Wakefield is the sole owner of the Wakefield estate." I sat very still, watching Nadine process what she'd just lost. "You just lost everything. I said quietly. The transformation happened faster than I expected. Within a week, the legal paperwork was processed. The house, the business, the bank accounts, all of it transferred to my name. Nadine, who'd been playing Lady of the Manor, was now technically my tenant. I gave her the basement, the same cold, unfinished space she'd given me. I took my old bedroom back, the master suite with the bay window. When I walked in, I found Brielle's clothes still hanging where my bed used to be. I had everything boxed and moved to the guest room on the second floor. While cleaning out the space, I found something interesting tucked under the bed. A black ledger, the kind you use for accounting. I opened it and my blood ran cold. Nadine had been running a second set of books. For the past 3 years, she'd been funneling money from Walter's business into private accounts, using my old credentials, signatures she must have forged or copied from old documents. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, systematically stolen while Walter was sick and dying. I called Ellison immediately. I found something. Something that proves Nadine wasn't just a gold digger. She was actively stealing from the company. Bring it to my office, he said. And Evelyn, don't tell her you found it. Not yet. I spent the next 2 weeks working with Ellison and a forensic accountant, tracing every transaction in that black ledger. The theft was extensive and sophisticated. Nadine had been careful, spreading the transfers across multiple accounts, using shell companies, making it look like legitimate business expenses. But I knew Walter's business inside and out. I'd built the accounting systems myself. I could see the fraud clearly. What do you want to do? Ellison asked during one of our meetings. We have enough evidence for criminal charges. She could go to prison. I thought about it. Nadine had tried to erase me, to take credit for 40 years of my work, to push me into a basement and forget I existed. I don't want to ruin her, I said slowly. I want to end her. Legally, completely, permanently. The next board meeting for Wakefield Properties was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I'd never attended one before. Walter had always handled the corporate side while I did the back-end work, but now I was the majority shareholder. I had every right to be there. Nadine had installed herself as acting CEO after Walter's death. She sat at the head of the conference table, surrounded by executives who'd been loyal to Walter. When I walked in, carrying my briefcase and the black ledger, the room went quiet. Evelyn, Nadine said, her voice tight. This is a closed meeting. Board members only. I'm aware, I said, taking a seat directly across from her. As majority shareholder, I have the right to attend any board meeting I choose. I opened my briefcase and pulled out copies of the ledger, sliding them across the table to each board member. What you're looking at is evidence of systematic fraud. For 3 years, while my husband was dying, someone has been stealing from this company using forged credentials and shell accounts. I watched the executives flip through the pages, their faces growing darker. The CFO, a man who'd worked with Walter for 20 years, looked up at Nadine. These accounts. I've seen these transactions. You told me they were approved acquisitions. Nadine's face was white. This is a misunderstanding. These are legitimate business expenses. No, I said calmly. They're theft, and they're traced directly to accounts in your name. I pulled out the bank statements the forensic accountant had obtained. You stole $847,000 from this company over 3 years. You're not just out of the house, Nadine. You're out of this company, effective immediately. The board voted unanimously to remove her as acting CEO and to refer the matter to law enforcement. Nadine left the building escorted by security, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. Brielle's meltdown came 2 days later. She showed up at the house, screaming about how I'd ruined her life, destroyed her family, stolen what was rightfully theirs. I have 1 million followers, she screamed at me in the foyer. I can destroy your reputation with one post. Everyone will know what kind of person you really are. I looked at her calmly. You think followers matter in probate court? You think social media means anything when your mother's going to prison for fraud? She tried to push past me to get to her old room. I'd had the locks changed. You can't keep me out of my own room. It's not your room, I said quietly. It never was. This is my house. It was always my house. Your mother just convinced you otherwise. I handed her a box. Inside were her things, The few personal items I'd found in the penthouse that weren't bought with stolen money. You have 10 minutes to leave, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. Brielle grabbed the box and left. Still screaming threats I knew she'd never follow through on. That night, I walked through my house room by room, reclaiming what was mine. I had Walter's study restored, removing the bar and pool table, bringing back his desk and his books. While cleaning out Walter's study, I found something I hadn't expected. Behind a row of books on corporate law was a small digital recorder, the kind Walter used to use for dictating memos. I pressed play. Walter's voice filled the room, scratchy but clear. The recording was dated 3 weeks before he died. "Evelyn, if you're hearing this, you found the ledger and you've kicked them out. Good. I'm so sorry I put you in this position. I was sick and scared and Nadine was there, making me feel less alone. But I saw what she was doing. I saw her watching me die and calculating how much she'd inherit. I saw her turning Brielle against you, feeding that girl lies about how you were just staff, just an employee. The truth is, you were always the architect of everything. The business, this house, our life together. I may have been the face of the company, but you were its soul. There's something else you need to know." He paused on the recording, coughing. "I set up a trust 5 years ago, before I married Nadine. Hidden shares in the company, held separately. They're in your name, have been all along. Check with Ellison. You don't just own the house, Evelyn. You own the company. Every brick, every contract, every asset. It was always yours." I stood in that study, listening to my dead husband's voice, and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and validation. Walter had seen me. Even at the end, confused and sick, he'd seen me. The next morning, I met with Ellison again. Walter mentioned shares, a trust. Ellison nodded. "I was waiting for you to ask. 5 years ago, Walter transferred 60% of the company shares to an irrevocable trust with you as beneficiary. It was separate from his estate, protected even in divorce or death. Nadine never knew about it. Those shares give you controlling interest in Wakefield Properties. I owned the company. Truly owned it. All the years of quiet work, of staying in the background while Walter took credit, and he'd protected me all along. Over the next month, I systematically removed everyone Nadine had installed. Her cronies, the people she'd hired to replace Walter's loyal staff, they all went. I brought back the people who'd built this company alongside me, the ones who remembered when we were working out of that tiny office. The company stabilized quickly. Without Nadine's theft and mismanagement, we were actually more profitable than we'd been in years. But I wasn't finished. I had Ellison draft a formal eviction notice for Nadine. The eviction notice was delivered to the basement where Nadine had been living since the board meeting. I'd given her the same courtesy she'd given me. A cot, a single bulb, no explanations. She had 30 days to vacate the premises. "You can't do this," she said when she confronted me that evening. "I'm Walter's widow. I have rights." "You're a tenant in my house," I corrected, "and you've been living here rent-free out of my generosity. That generosity has ended. You don't belong in a house built on 40 years of my work and love." Nadine's face twisted with rage and desperation. "Brielle will sue you. She has lawyers." "Brielle is welcome to try," I said calmly, "but she might want to ask her mother first about what happened to the stolen money." Nadine went pale. 2 weeks later, Ellison called with disturbing news. Brielle tried to forge documents to stall the eviction. She filed a claim saying she's a partial owner of the property through her mother's marriage to Walter. "Can she do that?" I asked. "She already did, but the forgery is obvious. I've reported it to the court and the police. She could face serious charges." I thought about Brielle, barely 30 years old, having lived her entire adult life on other people's money. "Give her one chance," I said. "Tell her to withdraw the claim and leave town, or answer to the courts for forgery and fraud." The message was delivered through Ellison. That night, Brielle disappeared. No goodbye, no confrontation, just gone. Her social media went dark. Her friends said she'd moved to California to pursue opportunities. The truth was, she'd run before the legal system caught up with her. Nadine was left alone in the basement, abandoned even by her own daughter. Her wealthy friends, the ones who'd surrounded her when she was living in the penthouse, stopped returning her calls. The social circle that had fawned over her as Walter's widow wanted nothing to do with a woman facing fraud charges. One morning, there was a knock on my bedroom door. I opened it to find Nadine standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Please," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I led her into the sitting room off my bedroom. She sat on the edge of the chair like she might bolt at any moment. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she started. "I know what I did was terrible, but please, don't destroy me completely. I can't go to prison. I can't survive that." I looked at her, this woman who'd tried to erase me, who'd stolen from my husband's company, who'd moved me to a basement and mocked me for being the ex-nobody invited. "I didn't destroy you, Nadine," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just let the truth out." Her bank accounts were frozen by court order while the fraud investigation proceeded. The district attorney was building a case. Nadine was looking at years in prison if convicted. "I'll plead guilty," she said desperately. "I'll pay everything back. Just make it stop." "I can't make it stop," I told her. "You committed crimes. Real crimes with real consequences. The stolen money didn't just disappear into a void. It came from the company Walter and I built with 40 years of work. Every dollar you stole was a betrayal." She left my room crying. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, just a quiet sense that justice was unfolding exactly as it should. Over the next few months, I began rebuilding. The house was restored room by room. Nadine's gaudy decorations went to an estate sale. I brought back the understated elegance I'd originally designed. I converted the basement into something useful, a writing studio where I could work in peace. The garden was replanted. The library was restocked. Slowly, the house became mine again. One afternoon, a neighbor I'd known for 20 years knocked on my door. "I found this in my garage," she said, handing me a dusty cardboard box. "Walter left it at my house about a month before he died. He said to give it to you, but only after everything's settled." I brought the box inside and sat on the library floor to open it. Inside were handwritten letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me. They were dated across the last 6 months of Walter's life. I started reading. Each letter was an apology, an explanation, a love note. Walter wrote about how he'd known Nadine was using him, how he'd seen through her from the beginning, but been too proud to admit his mistake. He wrote about his regrets, about wanting to protect me, about setting up the clauses and trusts to ensure I'd be taken care of. "You were always the real architect," he wrote in one letter dated a week before he died. "Not just of the house or the business, but of everything good in my life. I'm sorry I forgot that at the end. I'm sorry I let someone else take credit for your work. The world will know now. You'll make sure of that. I love you, Evelyn. I always have." At the bottom of the box were blueprints, plans for a project Walter and I had discussed years ago, but never started. A community center for women entrepreneurs, a place where women like me who'd worked quietly behind successful men could build their own legacies. The plans were detailed, complete, ready to execute. And at the bottom of the blueprints was a note. "Start this, in both our names. Show them what you can build." I took the blueprints to the company's development team. Within weeks, we had permits, contractors, funding. The Wakefield Center for Women Entrepreneurs broke ground 6 months after Walter's death. I threw myself into the project, overseeing every detail the way I'd once overseen Walter's business. It felt right, building something that was wholly mine while honoring what we'd built together. The center opened a year later to significant local press. It was beautiful, modern, welcoming, with spaces for mentorship, offices for startup companies, a childcare facility for working mothers. Everything I wished had existed when I was building my career. At the opening ceremony, I stood at the podium and spoke about Walter, about our partnership, about the years of quiet work that went uncredited. "This center exists because my husband understood something important," I said. "Success isn't built by one person standing in the spotlight. It's built by teams working in the shadows, by partners supporting each other, by people seeing and valuing contributions that don't make headlines." The crowd applauded. The center was a success. Then, 2 months after opening, I received a letter. Nadine was suing me for emotional damages, claiming my malicious prosecution had destroyed her mental health and social standing. The lawsuit was absurd, but it had to be answered. Ellison filed a motion to dismiss, but the judge wanted to hear arguments. We ended up in court, Nadine and her public defender on one side, me and Ellison on the other. Nadine took the stand and testified about how I'd manipulated Walter's will, how I'd manufactured evidence of fraud, how I'd destroyed her relationship with her daughter. It was all lies, easily disproven, but watching her spin the story was fascinating in a dark way. Then Ellison cross-examined her. Mrs. Nadine, you claim the fraud evidence was manufactured. Are you saying you didn't operate these shell accounts? He showed her the bank statements. Nadine stammered, those were for business purposes. Business purposes that your CFO knew nothing about? That weren't in the company books? That went directly to your personal accounts? She broke down on the stand, admitting to the theft while still claiming she'd been justified because Walter owed her for caring for him while he was sick. The judge was not impressed. The emotional damages lawsuit was dismissed. But more than that, the judge ruled that I was entitled to full recovery of all stolen funds plus penalties. Nadine's remaining assets, including a small condo she'd bought with the stolen money, were seized and sold. Nadine lost everything. The court case made her the pariah she'd made me out to be. She ended up working retail, living in a studio apartment, alone and bitter. I could have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt mostly nothing. She'd made her choices, she'd suffered her consequences. My energy was better spent elsewhere. The Wakefield Center thrived. Within a year, we'd helped launch 40 women-owned businesses. We hosted workshops, provided microloans, created networking opportunities. Women who'd spent their careers being assistants and support staff were finally building their own dreams. I walked through the center one afternoon, watching a mentorship session in progress, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in something completely mine. Then I saw Brielle. She was sitting in the reception area, dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans, looking nervous. When she saw me, she stood up. I know I don't have any right to be here, she said quickly, but I wanted to talk to you, if you'll let me. I invited her to my office. She sat across from my desk, hands folded in her lap, looking younger than her 29 years. I've been working at a diner in California, she said quietly. Waiting tables. It's the first real job I've ever had. What brings you back? I asked, my voice neutral. Brielle took a deep breath. I came to apologize for everything, for how I treated you, for what my mother did, for being part of it all. I was raised to believe that people like you, people who work quietly, don't matter as much as people who are visible and shiny. I was wrong. She looked up at me, and I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. I heard about the center, about what you're building here, and I wanted to ask if there was any way I could be part of it, not as someone special, not as a stepdaughter, as someone who needs to learn how to actually contribute something to the world. I studied her for a long moment. This could be manipulation, another attempt to get close to money and resources, but I'd spent 40 years reading people, understanding motivations. What I saw in Brielle was shame and a genuine desire to change. I'll offer you a job, I said slowly. Entry level, you'll work reception, answer phones, help with event setup. The pay is modest, the hours are long, and you'll earn every bit of respect you get. No special treatment because of who you used to be. Brielle nodded. I understand. Thank you. She started the following Monday, and I watched her carefully. She showed up on time, worked hard, didn't complain. Slowly, she proved herself. 6 months later, the Wakefield Center hosted its first anniversary celebration. We'd helped launch over 60 businesses now. Women who'd started with nothing were thriving. I stood in the main hall, looking at everything we'd built, and felt Walter's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. Brielle approached me, holding a piece of paper. I wrote something, she said nervously. A speech for tonight? I was hoping maybe I could share it. I read what she'd written. It was honest, painful, a confession of privilege and waste, followed by gratitude for second chances. You can share it, I said. That evening, Brielle stood at the microphone and told her story. She talked about growing up entitled, about watching her mother manipulate and steal, about learning too late what actually mattered. Evelyn gave me something I never deserved, she said to the room full of women entrepreneurs. A chance to become someone real. Someone who contributes instead of just consuming. If you'd asked me 2 years ago what success looked like, I would have described clothes and followers and penthouses. Now I know success is looking at yourself in the mirror and being proud of who you see. The room gave her a standing ovation. I watched from the back, tears in my eyes, proud of this woman who'd finally found her way. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm. I ran the company from an office at the center, surrounded by women building their dreams. I spent evenings in my garden, reading Walter's letters, finding comfort in the life we'd built together. The house, once full of loud parties and cruel laughter, was quiet now. Just me and the memories of 40 years. I'd hired staff who'd known me from the beginning, people who remembered when I was the one answering phones and filing the paperwork. We worked together like a well-oiled machine. Nadine tried to reach out once, a letter asking for forgiveness, and maybe a loan to help her get back on her feet. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash. But when Brielle asked if she could take courses in business management at night school, I paid for her tuition. When she asked for mentorship on a small business plan she was developing, I spent hours with her going over numbers. She'd earned that support through months of genuine work and change. One evening, I was working in my writing studio, the converted basement that had once been my prison. I'd turned it into something beautiful. Bookshelves, a comfortable desk, windows I'd had installed to bring in natural light. As I wrote in my journal, reflecting on the journey from basement to boardroom, I realized something profound. The basement hadn't destroyed me. It had been my foundation, the low point from which everything else was measured. From that cold concrete floor, I'd risen stronger than ever. I'd reclaimed not just my house, but my legacy. Walter had protected me from beyond the grave, but I'd protected myself too. I'd kept evidence, stayed patient, let my enemies reveal themselves. The women at the center started calling me the Foundation as a nickname, not because I was at the bottom, but because I held everything up. I liked that. I walked my garden one Sunday afternoon, checking on the roses I'd replanted. Brielle was there, helping me prune dead blooms. We worked in comfortable silence, two women who'd traveled very different paths to reach the same place. "Do you hate my mother?" Brielle asked suddenly. I thought about it. No. I pity her. She had everything, love, security, family, and she threw it away for money she didn't earn. That's a tragedy, not something to hate. Brielle nodded, clipping another dead flower. I almost became her. You saved me from that. You saved yourself, I corrected. I just gave you the space to do it. As the sun set over the garden, painting everything in gold and amber light, I thought about all the years of being invisible, of working quietly while others took credit. Those years had taught me something Nadine and Brielle had to learn the hard way. Real power doesn't announce itself. It builds slowly, brick by brick, foundation first. When Nadine had forced me into the basement, she'd thought she was burying me. What she'd actually done was put me back where I belonged, at the foundation, at the solid ground that holds everything else up. And when her house of lies finally fell, built on theft and manipulation and cruelty, I was still standing. The center, the company, the house, they all stood on foundations I'd laid 40 years ago. Foundations don't need to be flashy. They just need to be strong. I stood in my garden as the stars came out, thinking about Walter's last letter. "You were always the real architect," he'd written. He was right. I designed more than buildings and businesses. I designed a life, a legacy, a future for women who worked in shadows. Nadine had tried to erase that. Instead, she'd only made it more visible. Now the world knew what I'd built, and it was beautiful. They'd put me in the basement, thinking it meant I was beneath them. They'd forgotten that foundations are what hold everything up. And when their house of lies came crashing down, I was still standing on solid ground. That's the thing about foundations. You can bury them, ignore them, build on top of them, but you can never escape them. Because everything, no matter how high it reaches, eventually comes back down to where it started. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, hit that like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments if you've ever been underestimated and came back stronger.